All right, do I have everything selected? Okay. Please wish me luck that I don't have any mishaps with my microphone taking a crap on me in the middle of my videos. Hey guys, welcome back. Good morning. It is a beautiful rainy day here. Favorite thing to do on rainy days is to, well, definitely read books, but also to talk about books. So today I'm going to be filming a ton of videos, and that is my main priority for today, is to just talk about books all day. This is kind of the second installment of this series that I've started this year, where I'm going back and analyzing my favorite books, and I'm kind of going genre by genre. Well, I'm just really picking apart my favorite books. Since last year I had such a rotten year of reading, and it really struck me as to why that was because I was just reading a lot of books that were not made for me, that were not written for me. I would think that I got caught up in reading books that everyone else was saying were good books. And I realized my all-time, the core of my favorite genre is fantasy. Fantasy is really like where I should mostly be reading, and I started reading a bunch of other things like literary fiction, which I do like some literary fiction, but I was just reading so much of this other stuff and not enough fantasy. And so naturally, I didn't have a very good reading year. So for each book that I'm going to be talking about, I will also be adding different themes, tropes, buzzwords, and qualities, whatever it is that stood out that made me really enjoy these books. So let's just go ahead and get into it. We're going to be talking about my favorite fiction. The first book on this list is The Curiosities by Susan Gloss. I read this a few years ago, back when I lived in Florida. I actually received this book as an ARC, and I was very pleasantly surprised by this book. We follow this main character who is hired to run this nonprofit organization, which is like a summer program for artists. This organization was funded by this older woman who dedicated her life to art. And I don't think she had any family. She didn't have any children or a husband to leave her wealth to when she passed away. She had this really large home. The main character is hired for this job, which once she gets there, I guess there wasn't a whole lot of information about what her duties would be. So she shows up and she finds herself really in over her head. The group of artists was already pre-selected. When she shows up, she is given this packet of what she's supposed to do, what the attentions are, and part of her duties is to stock the house with groceries. The artists that were selected are supposed to move into the house, live there, and work on their art. And by the end of the program, by the end of the summer, they are supposed to have a gallery showing of all their work, and the intention is to get struggling artists' name out there, because a lot of artists do have to work as well as create, and sometimes the creative process is really challenging when you can't just throw yourself into it and you have to juggle all these other things. So that's what this is for. We have a very eclectic group of people. Things that I like in this book is it includes artist community, artists, stories of older people, quirky characters, married life, domestic drama. Nostalgic, reminds me of my grandma. Okay, the next one is City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. This book takes place over many decades, but it starts out in 1940. It follows a girl named Vivian who lives in England with her parents, but she gets kicked out of school. So her parents send her to live with her aunt in Manhattan, and supposedly her aunt runs a theater. And she does run a theater, but it's not like a fancy, theater where they do Shakespeare or whatever. It's more like a theater for like burlesque and sexy dancing. This move introduces Vivian to the party life and a bit more seedier, a different way of life, especially for women. Unfortunately, this also leads Vivian to a really big scandal, upturning her reputation. But what else can she do but carry on? She ultimately decides that this leads her on the life that she's meant to live and not the life of a traditional woman her parents were trying to bring her up to live. This is a coming of age saga story of this woman's fascinating life. She's 95 years old and retelling this story. During the time of this story, also, we are going through a war, which is kind of interesting because it brings in like this idealized life of women, especially for Vivian. And then she goes through this scandal, and then when the war comes along, it's like all of that was moot point anyways. And so that's kind of interesting to think, like in the moment it feels like the end of everything, and your life will never be the same. But even if she didn't go through that, the war would have destroyed things anyways, because it destroyed many people's lives, especially when you get towards the ending of this book. I don't know if it's the ending or this. I read this so many years ago. I think back when I very first moved to Florida. She also meets this individual who comes out at the other end of war with extreme PTSD, and the relationship between these two is like so hard. You feel so bad, and I feel like stories like this really make you see what the realities of war are for the soldiers, and I think that is so important. Like, I do think we don't think enough about our veterans, you know what I mean? It just makes you stop to think about the lives of people, the kinds of things that they might be suffering through. Backtracking, I kind of go back to my notes. I deviate from my notes, and then I go back and I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of wanted to say that. So also kind of going back to, so she has this scandal that changes the trajectory of her life, but then there's also the events that happened with the war, and I think her parents ended up having to flee London. I'm not sure. And then just the story of her aunt, and the story of this other woman that she becomes close to, and how collectively all of these stories just make for such a fascinating, fulfilling life for our main character as well as the other people in her life. So again, back to one of my favorite themes from the previous book, when older people retell their story and just how rich and fulfilling their lives are. The element of found family, rebellion against what society says that women should do with their lives. The resourcefulness during the war. The twist at the end was so good. The relationship that she also had with the man with PTSD. That relationship really stuck with me. The next one is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This one is a quintessential dark academia book. This is a subgenre or niche genre that I really, really like. This book was actually published in the early 90s, which was kind of interesting when I found that out, because I thought this book, it had just exploded over the last few years, and so I was thinking it was a newly published book, but it definitely isn't. But it has risen to popularity again. It takes place in a New England college. It follows a group of students who are studying an elite program of dead languages taught by an eccentric professor. And I don't mean dead languages. I want to say it's a specific language, ancient Greek, or what was it? I don't know. Either way, you can't do anything with it except just know about it. Anyways, all the boys are incredibly wealthy, old money, trust fund wealthy. But our main character, Richard, is actually an outsider and did not grow up with money. In fact, he is struggling to rub two pennies together when he comes to this college. So he tries to become very resourceful, at least faking that he has money in order to fit in. As the years go on, the boys become very close. And then there is a murder. And we have this classic case of what happened, who did it, and why. This book really set the baseline for dark academia because it looks at the problems of elitists, classism in a lot of different ways. One thing I find really interesting is the concept that these kids do not need a job when they graduate. They can afford to pay for an education to study this dead language that is not going to yield them any skills for a job. In fact, the dean actually wants to shut down this class because of this reason, because it is basically pointless and useless, and that is the point that they're trying to make in this story. In fact, it's these kids paying for this instructor year after year that keeps this class even afloat. This book really was longer and slow paced. It is definitely not a book because especially when I first read this, did not consider myself like a fiction reader. So for me, it takes me a little bit longer to get into books like this. But overall, I really enjoyed it. The end was absolutely insane. It was definitely worth the journey. Another thing that I did not care for that much in the story is I really don't like in many stories is when you have scenes where the group of like young adults are sitting around drinking, smoking, abusing substances, and just like having these deep conversations. All right, so some of the themes and things I liked about this book is the academia setting, the murder, the twist that completely surprised me, the strange group of kids, the odd professor, elitism and old money, like the rich and powerful, and kind of in conjunction with or not well off people. Like it definitely is different. It creates a different kind of personality. It creates a different kind of analyzing what that means for people when they have been born into so much money that they've never had to worry about money, how they view the world, their place in the world, other people. And it's not what you think. Like some people might look at rich people and think, well, why are they so upset? They have everything because they have money. But it's not what you think. Like just because they don't have money problems doesn't mean they have no problems. Money does not solve everything. And I think that's something so important. I understand life is hard. It's a struggle when you have to worry about money all the time, but also I do think that on the other hand, when you have so much money, you don't even need to worry about a job. That creates a whole different set of problems, like for children, because what do they have to work for then? And I don't necessarily feel like that's good either. It's better to like have to suffer a little bit, Anyways, I could really go down a rabbit hole with this idea, but that's definitely something that is prevalent in this book. I really liked it. Donna Tartt did incredibly well at characterizing people, so yeah. Okay, the next book is called The Dead Poets Society. And actually, so I thought I had read this book before I saw the movie, and I thought that the movie was based on the book, but I think it's the other way around. I think the book is actually based on the movie, but either way, the movie and the book, this story is so incredible. It's definitely one of my all-time favorite books. It is very short. And it follows this poetry-loving, eccentric English professor who was once a boy at the same all-boys private school as his students once upon a time. He knows the pressures that these rich kids are living with, the expectations that their parents put on them. The parents are raising these kids to be doctors and lawyers. So one bleak day, all of his students are sitting in his class. They look like they're half falling asleep. They're bored. They don't want to be there. And you could just see the weight of the world on their shoulders. So he decides to have a bit of fun and jump up on the desk and scream and yell. And he found a way to reach these kids on a very deep level and make poetry fun. Some of his favorite poems relate to these kids' lives and passions. His students transform and they start the secret society, the Dead Poets Society, and they sneak off campus in the middle of the night to go and read and cut loose about poetry. One student finds a new passion for drama, and he really wants to join theater. Well, this does not go over well with his parents at all. So they make a very formal complaint about what has gotten into the school, why are their kids unfocused, why are they being rebellious and argumentative, and so the dean looks into the professor in English class and he says, absolutely not, you will teach the curriculum this way. But the kids it's too late. The kids decide that they're not going to stand for it, and so they continue to meet at the Dead Poets Society. And they found a love that they are not willing to give up. And unfortunately, tragedy strikes and leaves this as one of the saddest stories I have ever read. This book has actually changed my life. You may actually see this book in future lists, but this book also made me want to learn poetry myself. Before reading this book, actually it was kind of cumulative, but this was one of the big things that made me change my outlook on poetry, because before this, I just kind of was like, no, poetry is not for me. I don't understand it. I'm too dumb, whatever. Getting to things that I loved about this book: school setting, dark academia again, group of friends, elitist snobs, as their parents are, not the kids. The discussion of expectations, what's worthy and acceptable versus what's a waste of time and money. The professor himself, his creative teaching methods, his heart and love for poetry and literature. His favorite poet is Keats. In fact, I have now 2 collections of Keats poetry, probably because of this book. One thing about his lessons is, like, as I was reading this book, I felt like I was a student sitting in the chair, just soaking up his lessons, and that was really cool. This book inspired me to want to learn something new. The heartbreak was not good, but it really definitely punches you in the feels. And it's also a very important topic. Now that I think about this book, it's actually a hell of a lot closer to home to me than it was when I first read it. And, wow, getting a little bit emotional. But one thing I learned relatively recently is that, and it's a trigger warning for suicide, by the way. So one thing I've learned recently is that teen suicide is like at an all-time high. It's an epidemic, and people need to be more aware of supporting their kids and their teenagers so that we can hopefully not have this being an epidemic. The next book is Everything, Everything. This one made the cut because it was probably I want to call it like a medical drama. Like, our main character is going through some sort of medical thing, and that, like, 5 Feet Apart. That was a really good movie. Oh, what's the blue one with the blue and white cloud by John Green? That was actually an incredible book too. That really was. That probably could make the cut as well. But this one, it was really interesting because I thought the ending is what really drove it over the edge for me, because it's really fucking twisted. This is a book about a girl who has a really unique life due to her allergy to just about everything. She cannot leave her house. Also, her mother is a doctor, and her father actually had passed away. So for the most part, she's all right and has accepted her life of living indoors, and they've really made this home everything she needs until a new boy moves in next door. And I cannot say anything more. I basically just could not believe the twist at the end of the story, but it was excellent. Also, I think that the characters are really cute. Like, the love story is actually really cute too. Okay, so things that I liked in this book: the love story was adorable because they spent a lot of time getting to know the little things about each other, and you could understand why they liked each other and why they connected. The male counterpart was not afraid to just insert himself into her life, because I also thought it was incredibly realistic, because she obviously has never really talked to many other kids, especially not boys, and as he's kind of inserting herself into her life to get to know her, she's like panicking like a girl who's never talked to a boy before, and I just thought that was excellently executed and very well done. She was nervous, she had self-doubt, all around this relationship. And again, back to the twist is what really made this book so incredibly shocking for me. The next one is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. This book was so bizarre and so cleverly written and atmospheric. This is considered a horror thriller, so I don't know if it actually should be on this list. I might have messed this up. I have another video I'm going to be doing after this called Best Horror or Best Thrillers. I feel like this might need to be on that list. That's okay. We'll keep it on here too. Anyways, this book doesn't really have a summary. I don't know how to explain this book at all, and I think that it's best that way. All I can tell you is it starts out with this guy traveling with his girlfriend to visit his family's house. There's obviously some distance there between the relationship, and you just have this overarching, like, kind of creepy vibes feeling throughout the whole story. This book slowly sinks in and unravels. It pulls you in, it holds you, and I definitely need to reread this book. I remember the ending just completely had me go. I somehow can't even remember the details of how it all happened. This book is brilliantly plotted, the way it all like comes full circle. As I was trying to think about how to explain this book, it reminds me of one of those illusions where like you can't tell what's like the surface or behind. But I feel like this book can only be explained with this picture, because you can't really explain it, you can only experience it. Shocking ending, a story that's atmospheric, a story that comes kind of full circle, quirky and odd, and I like a good short book. The next one is A Man Called Ove. That's not even how you say it, is it? I've heard other people say the name and I cannot for the life of me remember how it's pronounced, but I've always said A Man Called Ove. Anyways, this is a book by Frederick Bachman. This book is about a grumpy old man who gets some new neighbors, a pregnant woman, her husband, and their daughter. And it seems that since the moment they moved in, they totally throw a monkey wrench in Ove's life. He has this very calm and orderly routine of griping at everyone who doesn't follow these precise rules. And these neighbors kind of jimmy their way into his life. Like most grumpy old people, I believe that something has happened to make them that way. In Ove's case, he has lost his wife, and he doesn't want to carry on any longer without her. He keeps getting interrupted while trying to end his life. This book is just incredibly sad, and it's also happy, and you don't know why you're crying from sadness or happiness. And unlike most end of life stories like this, I found myself completely understanding his grief in just this deep pit of my stomach. Like, I understood, and I almost didn't object to him choosing that for himself, because like his grief is so overwhelming and you really grasp that. This book, despite the sadness and difficult topic, has a very wonderful ending, and it's fulfilling, and this story just really sticks with me. Things I liked about this story are stories about older people and their rich lives, all the things that have happened in their life. The love story of how much Ove loves his wife. They seem like complete opposites as they kind of tell the story, and you get to know what his wife was like and their relationship. Found family, quirky characters, and the juxtaposition of humor amongst an extreme scope of grief throughout the entire novel. So these opposites just really work well and just make you feel all these very layered emotions. And I like that feeling when you read a book. Also, it was incredibly atmospheric. Like, throughout the entire story, you just feel like the weight of grief throughout the whole story. Okay, the next one is The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. This is the story of this family. The father serial gets really lucky on an investment which changes him and his family's life from poverty to extravagant wealth with this real estate empire. The first thing Serial purchases is a surprise gift for his wife, the Dutch house. However, this ends up having a more adverse effect on the family, and they begin to unravel. This is told from the youngest boy's perspective, Danny, who has the most narrow perspective of all that happened throughout their life. So we end up puzzling out the events of how it happened. The way the story is told is such an interesting way to tell the story, because it's Danny as an adult, and he kind of goes back in time, and it's kind of like flashbacks to different events throughout his life, and it's not chronological at all. So I used to really like to write a lot, and over the last many years, I've basically come to terms with the fact that it's probably not in the stars for me. But I did kind of play around with the idea of, like, if I were to tell a story, I wanted to tell something like the way my brain thinks. Really is the only way I could, like, maybe kind of tell a story about my own life. You know, you have the life you're living, like, right now in today, but little things trigger flashbacks and memories, and this is like that experience kind of realized, and seeing it play out is a really cool experience for me. Other things I really enjoyed about this book are the quirky characters, the house. I love a book that has the central of a house. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of the story didn't even take place in the house, but somehow it feels like the center, the heart of the story, because that's where all the conflict happened. And so we kind of keep going back to different stories and like seeing this house, and you get a really feel for what the house looks like. The house is really interesting looking, like in my mind. Also, the house is kind of interesting too, because when they move into it, the people just left. Everything was the same. The furniture, the paintings on the wall, the painting of on the cover of this book is a painting that's hanging in there. I think that it's such an interesting detail that this painting that is the cover of this story has such a tiny space within the pages of the book, but to me it's kind of like a monumental thing, even though it's so small. I just really like it. The limited perspective of the story being told from the child's perspective, I really love that point of view, because it allows the reader to infer what's going on despite our narrator not fully understanding it. And I don't like when books over explain themselves, like give me some credit that I can puzzle it out. Or it also leaves room for not everything to be explained. I think that sometimes that is realistic, and that's leaves room for the book to continuously keep you questioning even when you're done finishing the book, because you don't understand it fully and you want to understand it, and so it keeps you thinking. Family secrets, I definitely like that. Sibling bond. Danny and his older sister, I really love their relationship. His older sister actually came down with diabetes, childhood diabetes, I guess, when they were living in this house. And there is like a scene of when she would get really ill that's interesting. And then it's just Danny and his sister. Throughout their conversations, she obviously has more understanding about what was happening, things that Danny did not know. So you kind of get more pieces to the puzzle when his sister is explaining her perspective of things that happened. And then these two are like really tight, and then they have this strained relationship with their mom. But Danny's relationship with his mom is different than his sister's relationship with their mom. That's a really interesting perspective as well. So many layers throughout this book. It's so good. And then the anger that I feel when parents are horrible. Yeah. Okay, the next book is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This book is simply about a teacher-student relationship amongst this like Me Too movement. And I actually had no intention of reading this book. It came out, I feel like it was really, really popular after the Me Too movement, obviously. I just did not want another politically driven story to like I was very skeptical about expecting it to just kind of add to this narrative of bashing and whatnot, but it was a real surprise. It was very refreshing commentary on everything. It was really, really good and really highlighted the nuances of many of these situations and the reality of these situations, with the story of this main character and the relationship that she willingly entered into and still held a torch for this man who she discovers is being accused of harming another student. As these accusations come out, she only just begins to start grappling with what really happened, and it becomes incredibly confusing for her. So she's trying to reach out to him to, I guess, understand it a little bit more. And you see her go through many different emotions of like, well, he's not a bad person, but then also acknowledging that what happened wasn't right. But then she's still, as I said, it's confusing because she holds a torch for him. But then also she thought that she was special. He told her she was special, and yet this is obviously a pattern of behavior for him. So she wasn't special. A new emotion to add into what she had. It's in the past, so she's just not going to touch it, but these thoughts start spinning the wheels. She also still holds that she never felt, well, maybe it was a messed up situation, maybe he's a liar. She still never felt like she was being abused because, like, I guess I'm not supposed to say these words on the internet, I'm sorry. She also doesn't feel like it was harm because she was a willing participant to all of it. And she feels that she loved him. So it's a lot of her going back and forth through these emotions, and you get a lot of like flashbacks to different conversations or different instances. Things that I liked about this book are tough topics that explore many aspects of the issue and takes a more in the middle approach and look versus a very black and white approach to a topic. I feel that this book was very empathetic, and teacher-student relationships. Not that this is something that I like or agree with. It's just that it's a dynamic that stirs up a lot of drama, which makes for really good storytelling. And it's problematic. Therefore, there is something to talk about. You know, why it started, how it ended, and the nature of the relationship. Something I'm finding that books that generally have this dynamic, I end up liking the book. So, all right, the next book is My Name is Red by Orhan Pamuk. This takes place in Byzantium. Oh my god, I cannot pronounce that. It follows artists that are painting like the temples, which are these thousands of tiny paintings. And I'm going to try to look up some pictures. When I was reading this book, I did look up what that looked like. I read this book so long ago, and this book is so dense. It has so much, and even just in the narrative style, that I can't remember smaller details. Like, this art form has a name. I can't think of what it is. I'm sorry. I'm going to try to look it up. Even in this profession, there's a lot of politics, competition, and secrets. One man ends up killing another man, but it's the narrator of the story that makes this story so unique. Each chapter is told by some oddball perspective. For instance, one chapter is told from the perspective of a dog, another perspective is told from the perspective of the color red, another perspective is even told by death itself. It's also an incredibly beautifully written book, and I have to say, this is one of those books you probably have to read like 2-3 times over to fully understand. So that being said, this is definitely a book that I feel like I still don't fully understand. Because of that, it's also just incredible. The things that I really enjoy about this book is it was wholly unique. Art, history, murder mystery, royals with slaves, unique narrators, and beautiful writing. So going back to the art thing, art was part of the world in this book almost. Like I remember vaguely one of the things I felt the writing was so beautiful. They're talking about how they mix the colors. The next one is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. Okay, it's about this trio of friends. There's 2 boys and 1 girl. A tragedy happened to the other boy, and so the male and the female character are coming together to share in their grief, and they hadn't spoken in quite a while, so they're coming back together and they start hanging out a lot. This girl was his girlfriend. Yeah, this girl was the dead kid's girlfriend. So she is this very mysterious and elusive private person, and she holds many secrets. And he is also really in love with her, but she was the girlfriend of their friend. So our main character, our narrator, also makes friends with this other girl named I want to say her name's Miyaki. They run into each other, and their friendship deepens. And then so I thought that was a really interesting story, because our main character, our narrator, has developed friends with the girl of his dreams, who's very mysterious and everything, and then this other girl who's completely opposite. She just says everything on her mind, and sometimes it's crude, but at least you always know where she stands. And then the other girl is just so private, you never know where she stands. And so he's kind of, one of my favorite things about this is, my favorite character of this story is Miyaki. I want to say it's the outgoing girl. The conversations that he has with that girl are so funny. It's just really, really good story. And I know that this is kind of hard. It's kind of hard to describe like Murakami books, and they're always usually about characters who talk and share about things more so than the plot and the setting. The things I liked about this were really quirky characters, deep philosophical conversations and discussions on specific topics, quotable lines, and then, as I said, the difference of these 2 girls. And it's like, while one may not always say what you want to hear, at least you always know where she stands, and then the other person is just really quiet. And I feel like maybe this is something that I can identify with in people that I have known throughout my life. I definitely get along with people who are just upfront, and you don't have to try to read between the lines, because I I cannot do that. I cannot. I will get it wrong every single time. I get paranoid. I get insecure because I don't know what they're thinking, how they feel, where they stand. I would much rather talk to someone who just says whatever's on their mind. So I like that a lot. The next one is also another Murakami book called After Dark, and this book takes place over the course of one evening, and it follows these different characters and snippets, like it's like a slice of life kind of thing over the course of one night. There is one character that really propels the story forward from one place to the next as he's searching for someone. This has been so long since I read this book. I have it in my mind he's actually looking for someone's cat. There's always cats in Murakami's books, and I freaking love that. I think that is so interesting. Anyways, I do remember this book being such a great time. I love this concept of it just taking place over one singular night. I guess there's a big music element to this book as well. Like each chapter, it has like a time period of the night, and then it has, I guess there's songs or whatever cluttered through. And I know this is very iconic, or this is a very Murakami thing to do in a lot of his books. And then overall, this book is just incredibly nostalgic for me. Like it reminds me of my early 20s, my late teen, early 20s, my young adult life when I lived in Dallas. I would meet up with my friends and we would always go to these different diners, and we would just hang out in the middle of the night and sip coffee and talk. For whatever reason, when it's at night, it just feels like a much different experience. It's more mystical. So yeah, this was a very special book to me, and I'm definitely going to need to keep my eye out for a physical copy of this book. Alright, the things that I liked about this book are it's nostalgic for me. It is very personal. I love cafe settings, nightlife, quirky characters, a story that comes full circle, and the use of music and specific times was very cool and different. We have two more left. Alright, the next book is The Snow Child by Ewan Ivey. I hope that I'm saying her name correctly. This book follows an older man and a woman who are this married couple, and they decide to move to rural Alaska to start over. They've suffered a very sad loss that has left them lonely, and life in Alaska is very difficult. They winter alone, as they learn from the neighbors, can be brutal and dangerous if you don't prepare well. One day, the woman makes a snowman on her yard, and she kind of like puts a scarf on it and a little hat and stuff, and then she sees this little girl kind of in the woods. Or did the snowman melt and then the girl appeared? Something like that. Oh, that's right. Okay, so the snowman melts and all of the like the hat and scarf and everything, those are gone. Then they see this little girl who has those things. So it's almost like the snowman turned into the little girl. However, she starts asking around about this little girl, and nobody knows. No, everyone's like, nobody has any children around here, and they kind of start making her feel like she's crazy and she's seeing something, and people really don't believe her. This book is actually based on a Russian fairy tale called The Snow Child, and it's just really cool, and it's atmospheric, and it's melancholy and quiet, and it has this very dense and unsettling winter, and this snow child changes the older man and woman's life. The things that I really liked in this book are the atmosphere and the dense melancholy tone and vibes that just it felt suffocating. It was folksy. I like that. I never really thought that I was a very like seasonal person that liked specific seasons in books, but this kind of makes me rethink that maybe I really like books that are like set in winter, especially when you're talking about something that maybe is a little bit creepier or something. It definitely creates like a creepy vibe. I do feel like I'm definitely a sunshine girl. I was born in San Diego. We like our sunshine, and snow makes me sad. I would like, when we lived in Colorado, I never lived in a place that snowed, and I would just hibernate like a bear for all of winter, and I would just want to curl up and not do anything until the sun came out. And I do not like winter. Also, the hope that comes from dismay. It leaves a lot of emotions and sadness and happiness all exist together, and that's also something that I really liked from A Man Called Ove. And the very last book that I want to talk about is called Z, a novel of Zelda Fitzgerald. Sorry, having a hard time getting that one out. And this book is by Therese Ann Fowler. This is a story about Zelda Fitzgerald, who is the wife of author F. Scott Fitzgerald. And I absolutely loved this book. I really don't know how much they embellished the story out that was not true. They did say that it took the bones of the story and then flushed it out to be a full story. So I don't know how much of it is 100% true. But if it is true, a big if it is true in how they characterized Scott, ew, this makes me really not like or respect Scott Fitzgerald at all. It does not cast him in a good light at all, and I can believe it. So Zelda is a very fascinating woman. She's a dancer and a free spirit, and was even interested in writing herself, and she did write some. She also kept a lot of journals. According to this book, she was a very doting, loving, and supportive wife, very understanding of Scott Fitzgerald's dreams and aspirations of being a writer. The things that he wanted above everything else was to be a prolific writer, and she was always there to help and support him. But in doing so, she herself disappeared. She was criticized for not being the type of wife that a woman should be, and she didn't keep house well enough. She was busy going to parties with Scott Fitzgerald instead of being home and having babies. And a lot of people in her life were criticizing her for this. And it seems like things got a lot worse when Scott got a friend, Ernest Hemingway. As we know, Ernest Hemingway is notorious for being an alcoholic and a womanizer. Now, all authors, it seems like, are alcoholics, so, that's not really anything I hold against people, but come on, being awful towards women. In my opinion, Ernest Hemingway was a very bad influence on Scott. Apparently, it seems like from this book that Zelda and Scott had a very close-knit relationship until Ernest entered the picture, and then Scott was very close buddies with Ernest, and Zelda started to, kind of disappear more and more as Ernest kind of rubbed off on Scott and affected his marriage with Zelda. This was an amazing book, and it all seems so realistic. I could definitely see that these kinds of things could be true. And after reading this book, I really did not want to read anything else by Scott Fitzgerald, and I have like 3 other books other than The Great Gatsby on my shelves that have been sitting there waiting to get read, but I'm just like, ew, I don't want to read anything by him. Because it's also said that Scott actually took Zelda's stories and used her work for his writing. And I'm just like, that is so gross. I hate that. But it's also not quite uncommon. Mary Shelley's story, her husband, Percival, I never can say his name. What a strange, odd first name. But her husband, it was said that her husband wanted to take credit for her work too, and he was like, well, you couldn't get it published in your name because you're a woman. Well, that's all well and true. She made it happen. But I mean, I guess you hear that so often, that these men want to take credit for females' work. And so I don't know how much of that is true either, but anyways, the things that I liked about this book are domestic troubles. And you'll see when I go into thrillers, of the things I like with thrillers, I tend to really like domestic thrillers over other types of thrillers. So I think this is just something that I really like in books. So domestic troubles, domestic drama, based on true people and or events. This person isn't this amazing person behind closed doors. The truth, the unveiling, because nobody is perfect. When women get the spotlight that they deserve. Zelda was really talented, and Scott got all of the attention, all of the accolades, and took Zelda for granted, which is definitely a product of the times, unfortunately, and thankfully we have come a long way from that time. I really like that authors are giving these women behind these great men their own story, because let's face it, these guys couldn't have done everything without the help and assistance and direction and support of the women in their lives. Yeah, it takes a team, okay? It's just not one person being amazing. It takes a team. And that is finally the end of this video. The raw footage is over an hour, so hopefully with editing we can crunch it down to something that's not too overwhelming. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this. Let me know if these are any books that you like, or better yet, knowing the things that I liked about these books, if you have any recommendations, go ahead and drop them below. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.